Judge tried to humiliate a black Marine sniper, but the general's salute left the courtroom silent. "Look at this piece of ghetto trash." Judge Harrison Whitmore III glared down from his bench. His black robes couldn't hide the sneer twisting his pale face as he stared at the defendant standing below. Damon Williams stood in handcuffs, his military bearing intact despite the orange jumpsuit. The 32-year-old Marine kept his eyes forward, jaw clenched tight. The packed courtroom fell silent. Cell phones appeared in the gallery. Reporters scribbled notes. Damon's grandmother Rosa sat in the front row, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "You people never learn your place, do you?" Whitmore's words echoed off the marble walls. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Even the court stenographer looked up from her machine. Damon's voice stayed steady despite the public humiliation. "Your Honor, I respectfully—" "Shut your mouth when I'm talking, boy." Have you ever watched pure hatred blind someone to the hurricane heading straight for them? 3 days earlier, Damon Williams had been living the quiet life he'd earned after 8 years of military service. His alarm buzzed at 0500 hours sharp, just like it had every morning since returning to Millbrook County 6 months ago. The small bedroom he'd grown up in remained unchanged. Faded photographs of his parents lined the dresser, killed in a car crash when he was 12. His grandmother Rosa had raised him in this same house, her weathered hands teaching him respect and dignity. Damon's morning routine moved with military precision. Bed made with hospital corners, push-ups and sit-ups in the backyard while dew still clung to the grass. The neighbors had grown accustomed to seeing the young black man maintaining his fitness, though some still whispered behind curtains. "Damon, baby, your breakfast is ready," Rosa called from the kitchen. At 78, she moved slower now, her arthritis making simple tasks difficult. But her mind stayed sharp, and her love for her grandson burned fierce as ever. He helped her sort her medications into weekly pill containers, each compartment labeled in his neat handwriting. The prescriptions cost more than her Social Security check, but Damon never complained about covering the difference. "Mrs. Williams, how are you doing this morning?" called out Bobby, the 10-year-old from next door. The kid had taken to following Damon around whenever he worked in the yard. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Damon's fixing that loose board on my porch." Damon looked up from his toolbox, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Hand me that hammer, Bobby." The boy scrambled to help, his face lighting up at being included. Damon had become something of a neighborhood hero to the local kids. He never raised his voice, never lost his temper, but commanded respect through quiet strength. Millbrook County stretched across rolling hills and farmland, population 45,000 split roughly along racial lines that had been drawn decades ago. The white families controlled the banks, the courthouse, and the better neighborhoods on the north side. The black community clustered in the older sections, where houses needed more repair and opportunities came harder. Downtown centered around the courthouse square, where a Confederate memorial stood despite years of peaceful protests. Judge Harrison Whitmore III had personally blocked every attempt to remove it, claiming it honored heritage and tradition. The Whitmore family had controlled the county's legal system for 3 generations. Harrison's grandfather had been a Jim Crow-era politician who'd built his career on keeping order. His father had continued the legacy through subtle discrimination and coded language. Now, Harrison carried the torch, his prejudices burning just as bright but hidden behind legal procedure. At the Veterans Center that afternoon, Damon helped elderly former soldiers navigate benefit paperwork. The facility stayed understaffed and underfunded, but he volunteered 3 days a week without complaint. "Sergeant Williams, you got any more of them job applications?" asked Jerome, a young veteran struggling with PTSD from Iraq. "Right here, brother." Damon handed over the forms. "You fill these out, I'll make some calls." His reputation in the veteran community was solid, Purple Heart, Bronze Star with Valor, 3 combat tours as a Marine sniper. He'd saved lives under fire and never talked about the details. The other vets respected his service and his character. But outside the veteran community, things got complicated. Some white residents appreciated his service to the country. Others saw only skin color and assumptions. Traffic stops happened more frequently. Store clerks watched him closer. Job interviews ended quickly despite his qualifications. Deputy Travis Cornfield had been watching Damon for weeks. The 29-year-old officer had built his reputation on aggressive policing in minority neighborhoods. He'd grown up hearing stories about the good old days when everyone knew their place. Thursday evening would change everything. Rosa needed groceries, her pantry running low on essentials. Damon borrowed her 15-year-old Buick, the car she'd driven since his high school graduation. "You be careful out there, baby," she said, pressing a worn $20 bill into his palm. "Always am, Grandmama." The sun was setting as he pulled out of the driveway, unaware that Deputy Cornfield was already positioning himself on Main Street. The officer had been waiting for an opportunity, any excuse to make contact with the veteran who carried himself too proudly for Cornfield's liking. Security cameras at the intersection would later show Damon driving exactly the speed limit, using proper signals, committing no traffic violations. But Cornfield wasn't interested in actual infractions. He was interested in sending a message about power and place in Millbrook County. Red and blue lights exploded across Damon's rearview mirror at 7:30 p.m. on Thursday evening. He'd been driving home from the grocery store, Rosa's prescriptions and a bag of fresh vegetables in the passenger seat. The 15-year-old Buick hadn't been speeding, hadn't run any lights, hadn't violated a single traffic law. Deputy Travis Cornfield's patrol car pulled behind him with deliberate aggression, the spotlight flooding Damon's interior with harsh white light. Damon eased the Buick to the curb on Main Street, right in front of Peterson's Hardware where evening shoppers could witness everything. The radio crackled as Cornfield called in the stop. "Unit 47, traffic stop on Main Street. Black male, older vehicle. Possible narcotics investigation. Possible narcotics investigation." Damon's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He'd heard those code words before, the kind that turned routine stops into something else entirely. Cornfield approached with his hand resting on his weapon, his face already set in the hard mask of assumed authority. At 29, he'd built his reputation on aggressive policing in minority neighborhoods, and tonight he was performing for an audience. "License and registration," Cornfield barked, not bothering with pleasantries. "Yes, sir." Damon reached slowly for his wallet, making every movement visible and deliberate. Military training had taught him how to de-escalate situations, how to survive encounters that could turn deadly in seconds. Cornfield snatched the documents with unnecessary force. "Where are you heading tonight, boy?" The word hung in the evening air like a slap. Several pedestrians had stopped on the sidewalk, phones already emerging to record. Damon kept his voice level and respectful. "Home from the grocery store, sir. My grandmother needed some items." "Grandmother, huh?" Cornfield's laugh was sharp and mocking. "What do you call your dealer now?" Mrs. Henderson from the church tried to step forward. "Officer, I know this young man. He's—" "Ma'am, step back or you'll be arrested for interfering with police business." Cornfield's voice carried the threat easily. The elderly black woman retreated, but her phone stayed up, recording. Cornfield studied Damon's license with theatrical suspicion, holding it up to his flashlight like he was examining counterfeit currency. "Damon Williams. This address is current?" "Yes, sir." "You got any weapons, drugs, or anything else I should know about?" "No, sir." "That's what they all say." Cornfield leaned down to the window, his breath hot and aggressive. "Funny thing about you people. Always innocent until we find the evidence." The crowd was growing larger. Tommy Peterson had emerged from his hardware store, shaking his head at the spectacle. Sarah Martinez, the young public defender, happened to be walking by and stopped to watch with professional concern. "I'm going to ask you to step out of the vehicle," Cornfield announced with theatrical authority. This was the moment everything changed. Damon had done nothing wrong, but compliance was survival. He opened the door slowly, hands visible, movements controlled. "Turn around, hands on the hood." The position forced Damon to bend over the car in full view of the growing crowd. Cornfield's hands moved roughly across his body, the pat-down more aggressive than necessary, designed to humiliate rather than search. "You people always have something to hide," Cornfield announced loudly enough for the audience to hear. "Pills, crack, guns. It's always something of your kind." A white woman in an expensive SUV slowed down to watch, her face showing approval at the display of law and order. But several other onlookers looked uncomfortable, their phones capturing every word and gesture. "Officer, I'm a veteran," Damon said quietly, trying to reach whatever humanity might exist in the man behind him. "Yeah, right. And I'm the president." Cornfield's laugh was cruel. "You got any ID to prove that fairy tale? Let me guess. Navy SEAL, right? You people love that story." Damon's military ID was in his wallet, but Cornfield had already dismissed the possibility. The deputy was writing his own narrative, and facts weren't welcome. "I smell marijuana coming from this vehicle," Cornfield announced with practiced conviction. It was a lie, and everyone present knew it, but the words gave him legal justification for what came next. "I need to search for this car. Officer, I don't consent to any search." "Don't matter what you consent to, boy. I have probable cause now." Cornfield's grin was predatory. "Should have thought about that before you decided to get high and drive through my town." More police units arrived, their sirens wailing unnecessarily loud for a simple traffic stop. Deputy Rodriguez and Officer Banks emerged from their vehicles, surrounding Damon like he was a dangerous criminal instead of a grocery shopper. "What we got here, Cornfield?" Rodriguez asked, his hand also resting on his weapon. "Another dealer thinks he's smart," Cornfield replied. "Claims he's a veteran, too. You believe that garbage?" The backup officers laughed along with their colleague, creating a circle of uniformed intimidation around the handcuffed veteran. The crowd pressed closer, phones recording the abuse of power in real time. Cornfield yanked open the car doors with theatrical force, dumping Rose's groceries onto the street. Milk cartons split open, vegetables scattered across the asphalt. He tore through the glove compartment, under the seats, making a deliberate mess while commenting loudly. "Look at this piece of junk car. Typical drug dealer vehicle, old, beat up, probably stolen too." "The registration is right there," Damon said, watching his grandmother's food being destroyed. "Shut your mouth unless I ask you a question," Banks snapped. "You're in enough trouble already." Cornfield continued his destructive search, pulling out floor mats, dumping ashtrays, finding nothing because there was nothing to find. But then he emerged holding Rose's prescription bottles, the ones Damon had just picked up from the pharmacy. "Well, well, well. What do we have here?" Cornfield held up the bottles like trophies. "Oxycodone, hydrocodone, tramadol. Looks like dealing to me, boys." "Those are my grandmother's prescriptions," Damon said, his voice still controlled despite the rage building in his chest. "The pharmacy receipts are in the bag with her name on them." "Sure they are. That's what all you dealers say." Cornfield tossed the bottles to Rodriguez. "Probably stole these from some old folks' home. You people got no shame." The crowd was getting restless now. Several black residents had arrived, recognizing Damon from his volunteer work. Mrs. Washington from the Veterans Center pushed through the crowd. "That's Sergeant Williams," she called out. "He's a decorated veteran. He helps at our center." "Ma'am, step back or you'll be arrested too," Rodriguez warned. "This is police business." But Mrs. Washington wasn't backing down. "I've known this boy since he came home from Afghanistan. He's got more honor in his little finger than— "Lady, I'm warning you," Cornfield snarled. "One more word and you're going to jail with your friend here." The threats weren't working anymore. More phones appeared. More voices rose in protest. A local news reporter had arrived, drawn by the police activity on Main Street. Channel 7's Sandra Kim was setting up her camera, recognizing a potentially explosive story. "Turn around, hands behind your back," Cornfield ordered. The handcuffs clicked with metallic finality. Damon's military training screamed at him to resist, to fight back against this injustice. But his grandmother's voice echoed in his mind. Sometimes, surviving means swallowing your pride. "Damon Williams, you're under arrest for possession of controlled substances with intent to distribute, obstruction of justice, and resisting arrest." Resisting arrest? Damon's composure finally cracked slightly. "I've been cooperative the entire time. You gave me attitude, boy." "That's resisting in my book." Cornfield's grin was vicious. "Maybe a night in county jail will teach you some respect for authority." The perp walk to the patrol car was designed for maximum humiliation. Cornfield forced Damon to shuffle in short steps, the cameras capturing every moment of degradation. At the car door, the deputy accidentally bumped Damon's head against the roof. "Oops. Watch your head there, convict." As the patrol car pulled away, Damon caught sight of Rosa's spilled groceries scattered across Main Street like debris from an explosion. The image would stay with him through the long night ahead. The Millbrook County Jail reeked of disinfectant and despair. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Deputy Cornfield dragged Damon through the booking process, each step designed to strip away dignity along with personal belongings. "Empty your pockets, convict," Cornfield sneered, standing too close while Damon complied. The booking sergeant, a tired-looking woman named Officer Mills, processed the paperwork with mechanical efficiency. Full name? Damon Michael Williams. Age? 32. Cornfield leaned against the counter, still riding his power high. "Make sure you put down drug dealer in the occupations section, Mills. That's what he really does for a living." The fingerprinting station was next. Cornfield grabbed Damon's hand roughly, pressing each finger against the scanner with unnecessary force. "You know how this works, right?" "Probably been through here before." "First time," Damon replied quietly. "Sure it is. You people always say that." Cornfield wiped the ink off Damon's fingers with a dirty rag. "Don't worry. It won't be your last time either." The mugshot camera flashed twice, front view, side view. The booking photos would later show a man maintaining his dignity despite the circumstances. Back straight, eyes forward, jaw set with quiet determination. "Strip search time," Cornfield announced with obvious satisfaction. "Mills, I'll handle this one personally." The search was thorough, humiliating, and completely unnecessary for someone arrested on minor drug charges. Cornfield took his time, making crude comments designed to break down his prisoner's composure. "Nothing hidden up there? You people are creative about where you stash your drugs." Damon stared at the concrete wall, using breathing techniques learned in military survival training. Count to 10. Focus on something else. Survive this moment to fight another day. The orange jumpsuit felt like sandpaper against his skin. The county-issued shoes were 2 sizes too small, forcing him to shuffle rather than walk with his usual military bearing. "Cell Block C," Cornfield announced to the guard. "Put him with the white boys." Let them welcome him properly. Cell Block C housed pretrial detainees awaiting court appearances. The large holding cell contained 8 bunks and currently held 3 other inmates. Cornfield made the introductions with theatrical malice. "Boys, meet your new roommate. Damon here thinks he's special because he claims he was in the military. Probably lying about that, too." Jake Morrison looked up from his bunk, a wiry man with prison tattoos covering his forearms. His third DUI arrest had left him desperate for any advantage in plea negotiations. He studied the new arrival with calculating eyes. "Military, huh?" Morrison's voice carried mock respect. "What were you, a cook?" "You people usually don't see real combat." The second inmate, Billy Jessup, was in for domestic violence charges. He nodded along with Morrison, eager to curry favor with the dominant personality in the cell. The third man, Carlos Mendez, kept his head down. He'd been arrested for driving without a license and wanted no part of whatever was developing. "Play nice, boys," Cornfield said, his grin predatory. "Dinner's in an hour. Try not to kill each other before then." The cell door clanged shut with metallic finality. Morrison immediately stood up, asserting territorial dominance in the small space. "So, what's your story, soldier boy? Afghanistan? Iraq? Or did you just wear the uniform to impress the ladies?" Damon claimed an empty bunk in the corner, staying calm despite the obvious provocation. "3 tours in Afghanistan." "Bullshit." Morrison stepped closer. "You're just another ghetto punk who bought some surplus gear at the army store." Billy Jessup laughed along, desperate to be included. "Yeah, probably never left the States. You people love stolen valor stories." The racial slurs started after dinner. Morrison and Jessup took turns testing boundaries, seeing how far they could push before getting a reaction. They'd learned that guards rarely intervened in disputes between white and black inmates. "Hey boy, you hear about that lynching down in Alabama last week?" Morrison called out around 9 p.m. "Too bad it wasn't in Tennessee, right, Billy?" "Damn shame," Jessup agreed. "Could have saved the taxpayers some money on this trial." Damon lay on his thin mattress, staring at the ceiling and controlling his breathing. The comments were designed to provoke violence, giving Morrison leverage with prosecutors who might reduce charges in exchange for testimony. The night guards seemed to encourage the harassment. Officer Barnes made his rounds every hour, always stopping to chat with Morrison about the problem in their cell. "Are you having any trouble with the new guy?" Barnes asked during the midnight check. "Nothing I can't handle," Morrison replied loudly enough for Damon to hear. "Though he seems pretty uppity for someone facing serious charges." The psychological warfare continued through the night. Lights stayed on. Guards conducted wellness checks every 30 minutes, slamming doors and making noise that prevented sleep. It was a standard technique designed to break down inmates before trial. But Damon had survived worse than small-town jail harassment. Military SERE training had prepared him for psychological pressure, isolation, and attempts to break his will. He used meditation techniques learned in combat zones, maintaining mental equilibrium despite the circumstances. Friday morning brought new levels of humiliation. The court appearance required another strip search, another orange jumpsuit, another walk through corridors lined with hostile stares. "Big day today, convict," Cornfield announced as he fastened the belly chain around Damon's waist. "Time to face the music for your crimes." The shackles forced Damon to shuffle rather than walk, each step a reminder of his current powerlessness. Other inmates called out from their cells as he passed, some offering support, others joining the mockery. The courthouse corridors buzzed with morning activity. Lawyers carried briefcases, clerks pushed carts of files, families waited anxiously for their loved ones' hearings. The sight of a black man in shackles drew stares and whispered comments. Sarah Martinez, the overworked public defender assigned to his case, met him in a small conference room adjacent to the courtroom. Her tired eyes and massive caseload showed in her hurried manner. "Mr. Williams, I'm Sarah Martinez, your court-appointed attorney. I've reviewed your file, and I think we can work out a plea deal that avoids serious jail time." "Ma'am, I'm innocent of these charges," Damon said quietly. "Those were my grandmother's prescriptions, and I never resisted arrest." Martinez looked up from her legal pad with surprise. Most defendants accepted guilt and negotiated from there. "Mr. Williams, Deputy Cornfield's report is very detailed. Fighting these charges could result in much harsher sentences. I understand, but I won't plead guilty to crimes I didn't commit. Something in Damon's tone made Martinez pause. She'd handled thousands of cases, and this defendant was different. His military bearing, his articulate speech, his quiet dignity, none of it matched the criminal profile in Cornfield's report. "Tell me exactly what happened," she said, finally giving him her full attention. As Damon recounted the events, Martinez took notes with growing concern. The story didn't match the police narrative, and she'd learned to recognize the signs of fabricated charges. "Do you have any military documentation?" "My ID was in my wallet when they arrested me." Deputy Cornfield dismissed it as fake. Martinez made another note. Military veterans received additional protections under federal law, and false accusations against service members could trigger federal investigations. "Mr. Williams, I'm going to need more time to investigate this case properly. Can you handle a few more days in custody while I gather evidence?" "Yes, ma'am. I've survived worse conditions." The courtroom was packed when they entered at 9 a.m. Word had spread through the black community about Damon's arrest, and supporters filled the gallery alongside curious onlookers drawn by social media coverage. Judge Harrison Whitmore III entered with his usual theatrical flourish, black robes billowing as he took his elevated seat. His pale eyes swept the courtroom with imperial satisfaction, lingering on the shackled defendant with obvious contempt. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced. "The Honorable Judge Whitmore presiding." Whitmore's gaze locked onto Damon with predatory intensity. This was the same man who dared to walk up his courthouse steps 3 days ago, and now justice would be served according to the natural order. Case number 2024 CR 1847 State v. Damon Williams. How does the defendant plead? Martinez stood. "Your Honor, we request additional time to review the evidence and—" "I didn't ask you, Counselor." Whitmore's voice cut like a blade. "I asked the defendant. Can he speak for himself, or do all you people need someone else to do your thinking?" The courtroom fell silent. Even the stenographer looked up from her machine. Martinez's face flushed with anger at the obvious prejudice, but she knew better than to challenge a judge directly. Damon stood slowly, his shackles rattling. "Your Honor, I plead not guilty to all charges." Whitmore's smile was cold and satisfied. The real show was about to begin. Judge Whitmore raised his gavel with theatrical satisfaction, his voice echoing through the packed courtroom. "Mr. Williams, you clearly haven't learned proper respect for your betters. The evidence against you is overwhelming, and your attitude shows complete disregard for this court's authority." The gallery held its breath. Rosa Williams sat in the front row, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks as she watched her grandson face injustice in chains. "Perhaps 6 months in county jail will teach you some humility," Whitmore continued, savoring every word. "Young man, you people need to understand that actions have consequences, and—" Boom! The heavy courtroom doors exploded open with military precision. Every head turned as the sound echoed off marble walls like a gunshot. The bailiff's hand moved toward his weapon, then froze in recognition. Major General Patricia Cain strode through the doorway in full dress blues, her uniform crisp and pristine, ribbons covering her left breast in perfect rows. 2 Marine military police flanked her in formation, their polished dress uniforms and white gloves marking them as Honor Guard elite. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Cell phones emerged from pockets as people struggled to process what they were witnessing. A 2-star general had just entered a small-town courthouse like she owned it. "Excuse me," Whitmore sputtered, his gavel frozen midair. "This is a closed proceeding." "You cannot simply dash, Your Honor." General Cain's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to commanding thousands of Marines. "I believe there has been a grave misunderstanding regarding the defendant." She approached the bench with measured steps, her bearing radiating decades of military leadership. The gallery watched in stunned silence as she produced an official folder bearing military seals. Major General Patricia Cain, United States Marine Corps. I'm here regarding Sergeant First Class Damon Williams. Whitmore's face had gone pale. I don't understand. This man is a common criminal facing drug charges. No, Your Honor. This Marine is one of our most decorated snipers. Cain's voice carried across the silent courtroom. 3 combat tours, Purple Heart, Bronze Star with Valor, and currently under consideration for the Medal of Honor. The words hit the courtroom like physical blows. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Martinez nearly dropped her legal pad. Even the bailiff straightened unconsciously at the mention of the nation's highest military honor. General Cain turned toward the defendant's table, her eyes locking onto Damon's. The 32-year-old Marine snapped to attention despite his shackles, his military bearing suddenly unmistakable to everyone watching. Sergeant Williams, Cain said, rendering a perfect military salute. General Cain, ma'am, Damon replied, his voice steady and strong for the first time since his arrest. The exchange lasted only seconds, but it transformed the entire courtroom. 2 warriors acknowledging each other's service and sacrifice. The respect between them was palpable, undeniable, and completely at odds with everything Cornfield and Whitmore had claimed. Your Honor, Cain continued, never taking her eyes off Damon. This Marine saved 17 American lives during an ambush outside Kandahar. He held off enemy forces for 6 hours with a damaged rifle and multiple wounds, refusing evacuation until his unit was safe. The silence stretched like a held breath. Every person in the courtroom was witnessing the complete destruction of a narrative, the revelation of truth that changed everything in an instant. Whitmore's hands trembled slightly as he processed the implications. This doesn't change the charges. The evidence clearly shows... Actually, Your Honor, Cain interrupted smoothly. My legal team has reviewed the arrest report. We found several concerning discrepancies. She gestured to a Marine Corps lawyer who had entered behind her, a full colonel carrying additional documentation. The military's legal machinery was now fully engaged. Furthermore, Cain continued, we've obtained the security footage from the intersection where Sergeant Williams was stopped. The video clearly shows no traffic violations occurred. Martinez shot to her feet. Your Honor, I move to admit this new evidence. But Cain wasn't finished. We've also reviewed Deputy Cornfield's service record. It appears he was discharged from the Army for misconduct before joining civilian law enforcement. Cornfield, who had been watching from the prosecutor's table, went white as a sheet. His carefully constructed authority was crumbling in real time as his past caught up with him. The prescription bottles cited as evidence? Cain held up pharmacy receipts. Legally prescribed to Mrs. Rosa Williams, Sergeant Williams' grandmother, picked up 30 minutes before his arrest. The pharmacy's security cameras confirm this timeline. The power dynamic in the courtroom had completely reversed. Whitmore, who had wielded absolute authority moments before, now looked small and uncertain behind his bench. The man he'd been about to sentence as a common criminal had just been revealed as a war hero. General, Whitmore tried to regain control. While I respect the military, this court, Cain interrupted with steel in her voice, appears to have arrested a decorated Marine veteran on false charges. I trust Your Honor will want to avoid any federal investigations into potential civil rights violations. The threat was delivered with diplomatic precision, but everyone understood its weight. The federal government was now watching, and small-town judges suddenly found themselves playing in a much bigger arena. Damon remained at attention throughout the exchange, his dignity restored but his composure unchanged. He had survived worse than false imprisonment, and his military training had prepared him for this moment of vindication. The courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations as the full magnitude of the situation became clear. The man they had seen humiliated and chained was actually a hero who had bled for his country. The deputy who had arrested him was revealed as a fraud. The judge who had been ready to sentence him now faced potential federal scrutiny. General Cain's presence had changed everything in less than 5 minutes. Justice was about to be served, but not in the way anyone had expected. The transformation in the courtroom was instantaneous and devastating. Deputy Cornfield, who had been lounging confidently at the prosecutor's table, now sat rigid with terror as his world collapsed around him. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air conditioning. "Your Honor," General Cain continued with military precision, "I believe Deputy Cornfield has some explaining to do about his arrest report." Cornfield shot to his feet, panic evident in his jerky movements. I should call my supervisor." "Deputy, you will remain seated," Cain commanded with the authority of someone who had controlled battlefields. "These proceedings concern your conduct." Judge Whitmore's face had gone ashen. The man who had ruled this courtroom like a personal kingdom now faced the scrutiny of federal military justice. His hands shook slightly as he gripped his gavel. "General Cain, while I appreciate the military's interest, this court operates under civilian authority." "Of course, Your Honor. But when a decorated Marine is falsely arrested, it becomes a matter of federal concern." Cain's smile was polite but sharp as a blade. "I'm sure you understand." District Attorney Rebecca Morrison, who had been watching from the gallery, approached the bench with obvious alarm. She had built her career on maintaining good relationships with law enforcement, but this situation threatened everything. "Your Honor, in light of this new information, the state requests time to review all evidence." "Too late for that," Cain replied smoothly. "Colonel Martinez, would you present our findings?" The Marine legal officer stepped forward with a thick folder. "Your Honor, we've conducted a preliminary investigation. Deputy Cornfield's arrest report contains multiple false statements." Cornfield tried again to leave. "I really need to contact—" "Sit down," Whitmore snapped, his anger now directed at the deputy who had created this disaster. The judge was quickly calculating how to distance himself from the brewing scandal. Colonel Martinez continued reading. "The report claims Sergeant Williams was driving erratically. Traffic cameras show normal legal driving. The report claims marijuana odor justified the search. No drugs were found except legally prescribed medications." Sarah Martinez, the public defender, was frantically taking notes as her case transformed from routine plea bargain to potential federal lawsuit. Her earlier exhaustion had been replaced by sharp professional focus. "Furthermore," the Marine colonel continued, "Deputy Cornfield claimed the defendant was uncooperative and threatening. Multiple cell phone videos show Sergeant Williams remaining respectful throughout the encounter." The gallery erupted in murmurs. Several people held up their phones, confirming they had recorded everything. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Cornfield's face had gone gray. His career was over, his reputation destroyed, his future uncertain. "I was just doing my job," he whispered, but his voice carried no conviction. "Your job," General Cain said with ice in her voice, "was to serve and protect. Instead, you targeted a war hero because of his skin color." Judge Whitmore cleared his throat, desperately trying to regain control of his courtroom. "In light of this new information, I believe we should dismiss all charges against Mr. Williams." "Sergeant Williams," Cain corrected sharply. "He has earned that title through blood and sacrifice." "Yes, of course. Sergeant Williams." Whitmore's voice was barely above a whisper. "All charges are hereby dismissed with prejudice." The bailiff moved to remove Damon's shackles, his movements respectful now instead of casual. As the chains fell away, Damon straightened to his full height, his military bearing restored for all to see. "Deputy Cornfield," Whitmore continued, his voice gaining strength as he found someone to blame, You are hereby held in contempt of court for filing false reports. Sheriff Williams, no relation to Damon, had arrived and was conferring quietly with his superiors via radio. The conversation was brief and decisive. Deputy Cornfield, you are suspended immediately pending a full investigation, the sheriff announced. Please surrender your badge and weapon. Cornfield's hands trembled as he removed his badge, the symbol of authority that had defined his identity for the past 5 years. The weight of his service weapon felt heavier as he placed both items on the prosecutor's table. I want a lawyer, he mumbled, finally understanding the gravity of his situation. You'll need one, District Attorney Morrison replied coldly. She was already calculating how to prosecute her former ally to save her own career. General Cain approached Damon with formal dignity. Sergeant Williams, please accept the Corps' apology for this disgraceful treatment. Thank you, ma'am, Damon replied, his voice steady despite the emotional whirlwind of the past hour. Rosa Williams had been helped to her feet by other family members in the gallery. Tears of relief and pride streamed down her weathered face as she watched her grandson's vindication. The courtroom erupted in applause from the black community members who had supported Damon throughout the ordeal. Cell phone cameras captured every moment as justice finally prevailed. But General Cain wasn't finished. Her presence had restored Damon's honor, but the systemic problems that created this injustice still needed addressing. Your Honor, she said with quiet authority, I trust the appropriate federal agencies will be notified about these civil rights violations. Whitmore's face went pale again. The immediate crisis was resolved, but the larger reckoning was just beginning. Within hours of General Cain's courtroom intervention, the story exploded across national media. CNN's breaking news banner read, Decorated Marine Hero Falsely Arrested in Tennessee. Fox News led with, Military Veteran Vindicated After Racist Arrest. MSNBC featured expert panels discussing systemic racism in small-town justice systems. The cell phone videos from Damon's arrest had gone viral overnight. #Millbrook Justice trending nationally with over 2 million shares. #veteran abuse reached the top of Twitter's trending topics. Celebrity activists, military veterans, and civil rights leaders all shared the footage with outraged commentary. By Monday morning, FBI agents had arrived in Millbrook County. Special Agent Rebecca Torres led a civil rights investigation team that immediately seized the Sheriff's Department records, courthouse files, and Cornfield's personnel jacket. We're looking at potential violations of federal civil rights statutes, Torres announced at a press conference. When law enforcement targets individuals based on race, it becomes a federal matter. The investigation revealed a disturbing pattern. Cornfield's arrest records showed clear racial bias. 78% of his arrests involved minorities despite the county's demographics. His use of force reports told an even uglier story. Judge Whitmore's sentencing patterns came under scrutiny next. Statistical analysis revealed he consistently imposed harsher sentences on black defendants compared to white defendants for identical crimes. The disparities were mathematically impossible to explain as coincidence. Former defendants began coming forward with similar stories. Marcus Thompson, a black teacher, described being sentenced to 90 days for a traffic violation that typically received fines. Jennifer Washington, a nurse, told reporters about receiving maximum penalties for minor infractions. I always thought it was just bad luck, Thompson said during a televised interview. Now I understand it was something much worse. The Pentagon issued an official statement supporting Damon and condemning his treatment. Secretary of Defense Patricia Mills called it an unconscionable attack on a decorated service member who has sacrificed for our freedoms. Military veterans across the country rallied to Damon's cause. The veterans of foreign wars issued a statement. The American Legion launched a legal defense fund. Marine Corps Association members flooded social media with support. 3 weeks after the courthouse confrontation, federal grand juries returned indictments. Deputy Cornfield faced charges of deprivation of rights under color of law, perjury, and filing false police reports. Each charge carried potential prison time. Judge Whitmore's indictment was even more devastating. The federal government charged him with conspiracy to deprive civil rights, pattern of discrimination, and abuse of judicial authority. His legal career was over regardless of trial outcomes. The criminal trial began 6 months later in federal court in Nashville. Media trucks lined the streets outside the courthouse. Civil rights activists held vigils. Military veterans in dress uniforms stood honor guard for Damon each day. Prosecutor Janet Williams presented overwhelming evidence. Statistical analyses showing discriminatory patterns, video footage of Cornfield's lies, audio recordings of Whitmore's prejudicial statements, expert testimony on systemic racism in rural justice systems. Cornfield's defense attorney tried to portray him as a product of his environment, someone following established practices rather than creating them. The strategy failed spectacularly when prosecutors played recordings of Cornfield bragging about keeping those people in line. Whitmore's defense proved even weaker. His attorneys claimed he was simply applying law strictly and consistently. Then, prosecutors presented 20 years of sentencing data showing clear racial disparities. The defendant systematically denied equal justice under law. Prosecutor Williams told the jury, "He perverted his oath and betrayed the Constitution he swore to uphold." Defense witnesses crumbled under cross-examination. Character references from white community leaders couldn't overcome mathematical evidence of discrimination. Claims about tough-on-crime policies fell apart when racial disparities were highlighted. Damon's testimony proved devastating to both defendants. He spoke with quiet dignity about his military service, his love for his country, and his grandmother's faith in American justice. When prosecutors played Whitmore's courtroom statements, several jurors visibly recoiled. "I served this country for 8 years," Damon said from the witness stand. "I bled for the Constitution that promises equal justice under law. These men violated everything I fought to protect." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts for both defendants. The verdict sparked celebration outside the courthouse as civil rights supporters cheered the rare conviction of law enforcement officials. Sentencing came 2 months later. Cornfield received 30 months in federal prison, lifetime ban from law enforcement, and community service with civil rights organizations. His wife filed for divorce the same week. His children refused contact. Judge Whitmore's sentence was harsher. 5 years federal prison, forfeiture of judicial pension, permanent disbarment, and restitution payments to victims of discriminatory sentencing. His family's reputation, built over 3 generations, lay in ruins. "Your actions betrayed the most sacred trust in our justice system," the federal judge said during sentencing. "You turned the courthouse into an instrument of oppression rather than justice." The convictions triggered systemic reforms across Tennessee. The state implemented mandatory bias training for all law enforcement officers. Body cameras became required equipment. Judicial sentencing underwent statistical monitoring for discriminatory patterns. Millbrook County hired its first black deputy sheriff. The courthouse installed a memorial honoring veterans of all races. The Confederate monument was finally removed after the federal investigation revealed its connection to intimidation tactics. Damon received formal apologies from the governor, state attorney general, and county commission. The Marine Corps promoted him to staff sergeant in a ceremony attended by General Cain and local media. More importantly, a scholarship fund was established in Rosa Williams' name to support military families facing legal challenges. Damon's story became a case study in law schools and police academies across the country. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund used the case to challenge discriminatory practices in rural courts nationwide. The Southern Poverty Law Center documented similar patterns in dozens of counties, using Damon's experience as a template for federal intervention. Justice delayed is justice denied, civil rights attorney Benjamin Crump said at a press conference. But Sergeant Williams proved that truth and courage can overcome even the most entrenched systems of oppression. The financial settlements were substantial. Cornfield faced personal bankruptcy from legal fees and civil judgments. Whitmore lost his family's generational wealth to victim compensation funds. But the most significant victory was symbolic. A Black Marine veteran had stood up to systematic racism and won complete vindication. His courage inspired others to challenge injustice, knowing that truth and persistence could overcome even the most powerful opponents. The federal courthouse in Nashville added Damon's case to its permanent civil rights exhibition, honoring his role in advancing equal justice under law. 6 months after his vindication, Damon Williams stood on the courthouse steps where his nightmare had begun. The morning sun cast long shadows across the same marble where Judge Whitmore had once blocked his path with racist contempt. Now those steps led to his new office as Director of Veterans Affairs for Millbrook County. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who had been dragged from this building in shackles now returned each day to serve the community that had failed him. His corner office overlooked the square where the Confederate monument once stood, replaced by a memorial honoring veterans of all races who had served their country with distinction. "Morning, Director Williams," called out Janet Peterson from the hardware store. The white business owner had become one of Damon's strongest supporters after witnessing his arrest that terrible Thursday evening. "Good morning, Mrs. Peterson," Damon replied with genuine warmth. The transformation in community relationships had been remarkable but gradual, built on trust earned through daily service rather than demanded through position. His grandmother Rosa attended his swearing-in ceremony, her weathered hands shaking with pride as he took the oath of office. At 78, she had lived through segregation, civil rights struggles, and now witnessed her grandson's triumph over injustice. Her faith in American ideals had been vindicated. The Veterans Affairs office buzzed with activity as Damon helped former service members navigate benefit applications, job searches, and housing assistance. The federal funding had increased dramatically after his case drew national attention to rural veterans' needs. "Sergeant Williams, you got a minute?" asked Jerome Martinez, the young Iraq veteran who had struggled with PTSD. Now he worked as Damon's assistant, his own life stabilized through the programs they had built together. "Always got time for you, brother." "What's up?" "Channel 7 wants to do a 6-month follow-up story. Are you interested?" Damon paused in reviewing benefit applications. Media attention had been overwhelming initially, but he had learned to use his platform strategically. Each interview, each speaking engagement was an opportunity to highlight veterans' issues and criminal justice reform. "Set it up. We can showcase the new job training program." The ripple effects of his case continued expanding. Police departments across Tennessee had implemented bias training programs. Federal monitoring of rural courts had uncovered discrimination in dozens of counties. Law schools taught his case as a landmark example of civil rights enforcement. Deputy Cornfield was serving his sentence in federal prison. His law enforcement career permanently ended. Reports indicated he spent most of his time in protective custody, his former colleagues viewing him as a liability rather than a brother in blue. Judge Whitmore's fall had been even more complete. Disbarred, bankrupt, and imprisoned, he had become a cautionary tale about the consequences of judicial corruption. His family name, once synonymous with power in Millbrook County, now carried shame and disgrace. But Damon found no satisfaction in their punishment. Justice required accountability, but revenge served no constructive purpose. His focus remained on building better systems, rather than dwelling on past wrongs. "You know what the hardest part was?" Damon reflected during a speaking engagement at the Marine Corps base in Quantico. "It wasn't a false arrest or jail time. It was maintaining faith that the system could work correctly when it seemed completely broken." The audience of young Marines hung on every word. His story had become legendary within military circles, a reminder that serving your country didn't guarantee fair treatment, but that courage and persistence could overcome even systematic injustice. Military training teaches us that the mission comes first, he continued. Sometimes the mission is surviving unjust treatment while maintaining your dignity. Sometimes it's standing up for others facing similar challenges. But the mission is always bigger than personal comfort. Rosa Williams passed away peacefully 8 months after his vindication, long enough to see her grandson honored but before age could diminish her pride. Her funeral drew hundreds of mourners, including General Cain and veterans from across the state. Damon delivered the eulogy with military precision and deep emotion. "She taught me that real strength isn't about fighting back when you're angry," he said at the graveside service. "Real strength is maintaining your principles when the whole world seems against you." The scholarship fund established in Rosa's name had already helped 20 military families facing legal challenges. Corporate sponsors and individual donors had contributed over $200,000, ensuring her legacy would continue helping others. As Damon stood on the courthouse steps that October morning, he reflected on the journey from humiliation to vindication. The physical scars from Afghanistan had healed years ago, but the emotional wounds from injustice required different treatment. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he often told audiences. "It happens through daily choices by ordinary people who refuse to accept that wrong is inevitable." His phone buzzed with a text from General Cain, now retired but still mentoring veterans transitioning to civilian careers. "Proud of you, Marine. Semper Fi. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like and subscribe for more stories of courage overcoming injustice. Comment below. How do we better support our veterans when they return home? Use #RealHeroes to share stories of everyday courage in your community. Follow for updates on Damon's continued work for justice and veteran advocacy. When you see injustice happening in front of you, what will you choose? Will you be a silent witness or an active participant in change? Remember, every generation must decide between comfort and courage. What will your choice say about who you really are?